Imagine a social network. But hold on, I'm not talking about the blue app on your phone or TikTok or, whatever is eating up our screen time these days.
Right.
I want you to picture a network built decades before the internet really conquered our reality. This is an analog network. It didn't run on fiber optics. It ran on handshakes, private jets, and whispers in mahogany rooms. And the currency, it wasn't likes or shares. The currency was influence. It was blackmail. And in its darkest, most secluded corners, the currency was absolute depravity.
It is a chilling thought when you frame it that way. We're so conditioned to think of networks as like digital infrastructure servers, data centers, cables under the ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
But the most powerful networks in human history have always been biological. They are human. And usually the stronger the bond between the nodes of that network, the darker the secret that holds it all together.
That is the perfect way to put it. And today, we are doing something a little different. We are taking a dual-focused deep dive. We're going to look at two massive, seemingly separate worlds that, when you peel back the layers, actually operate on the exact same mechanical principle, manipulation.
Okay.
First, we're going to unpack the Jeffrey Epstein case. But I promise you, this isn't the tabloid version you've heard 1,000 times. We're going deep into the psychology, the specific mechanics of how a nobody became a somebody, and the intelligence connections that everyone speculates about but few actually understand.
And then we're going to pivot. We are going to take those lessons about leverage and power and apply them to the current global chessboard. We're going to look at how world leaders are managing crises in Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba right now.
It sounds like a lot,
Yes.
jumping from a predator's private island to the Situation Room.
Yeah.
But trust me, the connective tissue is there. And to guide us through this, we are relying exclusively on the insights and analysis of Mookie Tenenbaum. He's an international observer who has a knack for looking past the headlines and staring directly at the raw machinery of power underneath.
And that is a crucial distinction to make right at the top. Everything we discussed today, every psychological profile, every theory about intelligence agencies, every prediction about the collapse of regimes, it all comes directly from the perspective laid out by Mookie Tenenbaum.
Right.
He offers a very specific, unfiltered lens on these events, and our job today is to look through that lens.
So our mission is simple, even if the content is, frankly, terrifying. How did a poor kid from New York become the center of a global web of evil? And how are the leaders of today using similar tactics, leverage, distraction, and the management of heat to keep the world from boiling over? Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the man himself, Jeffrey Epstein. When you hear that name now, it just carries so much weight. You think billionaire, you think financial mastermind, you think connected to everyone.
Sure, that's the mythology.
But Mookie Tenenbaum paints a very different picture of his origins, one that completely contradicts the mythology Epstein built around himself.
That's right. There is this pervasive mythos that Epstein was, born into the elite, or that he was some kind of financial savant from day one who just naturally ascended to the throne.
Yeah, like he just stepped out of a limousine at birth.
Exactly. But Mookie Tenenbaum points out that Epstein was actually the definition of a poor kid from New York. He wasn't a Rockefeller. He wasn't a Carnegie. His father wasn't a banker or a titan of industry. He was a public employee.
A public employee doing what?
He was a gardener for the city parks department.
A gardener? Wow. That is a hell of a long way from a private island in the Caribbean and a townhouse on the Upper East Side.
It's almost a Dickensian starting point.
It really is.
It is a very long way. And Mookie Tenenbaum busts another major myth here, the genius label.
Okay, I was waiting for this one.
Later in life, the press and his associates loved to call Epstein a math genius. You heard these stories about him solving complex equations in his head.
Right, like he was a human calculator.
But Tenenbaum notes that if you actually go back and look at the record, look at his time as a teacher or a student, the reality was different. His teachers didn't see a genius, they saw a nerd.
A nerd, not a prodigy.
A nerd. He was smart, certainly. He had a facility for numbers. But he wasn't this untouchable Will Hunting-style intellect. In fact, he dropped out of university.
He didn't even graduate.
Never even finished his degree. So you have a college dropout, the son of a park gardener, with no family money and no verified credentials.
So this is the million-dollar question, or I guess the billion-dollar question in his case.
Yeah.
How does a college dropout with that background jump the line? How do you go from grading papers to managing billions for the wealthiest families in America? There has to be a catalyst.
This is where it gets fascinating and where Mookie Tenenbaum's analysis really digs into the sociology of that era. He highlights a specific crucial connection, a man named Wexler.
Wexler. Okay, I feel like this is a name that gets buried in the footnotes usually.
It does, but according to Tenenbaum, it's the key to the whole lock. Epstein managed to get a job teaching at the Dalton School, which is this incredibly elite private school in New York.
And that in itself is strange, right? Without a degree.
It's a huge fluke. Getting hired there without a degree is almost unheard of. But while he's there, he's teaching the children of the masters of the universe. And through that network, he meets Wexler.
And who was Wexler in this ecosystem? What was his role?
Wexler was a power player, a financial heavy hitter. But more importantly, he had a very specific, almost predatory hiring philosophy. Mookie Tenenbaum explains that Wexler explicitly looked for poor and ambitious kids.
Poor and ambitious. That's a very specific profile. Why not hire the Harvard MBA with the pedigree?
Because of control and hunger. Mookie Tenenbaum breaks this down. Wexler believed that if you hired someone who was already comfortable, someone who came from money, who had the degree, who had options, they wouldn't have the fire.
They wouldn't be desperate.
They might leave, they might have boundaries, but a poor kid, a kid who has tasted what it's like to have nothing and is suddenly given a taste of the high life, that kid is yours.
They're indebted to you, psychologically.
Exactly. They are desperate to keep their seat at the table. They will do what is asked of them. Wexler believed they made the absolute best employees because their ambition was fueled by the fear of poverty.
And Epstein fit that mold perfectly.
To a T. He was smart enough to do the math, but he was hungry enough to do, well, whatever else was required. But as Mookie Tenenbaum points out, Epstein's ambition wasn't just professional. It wasn't just, I want to be rich. It was pathological.
And that leads us to the clinical side of things.
Yeah.
I mean, we throw around words like narcissist or sociopath all the time on the internet.
All the time.
But Mookie Tenenbaum doesn't mince words here. He categorizes Epstein as a clinical psychopath.
Yes, and he breaks down exactly what that means, moving away from the Hollywood definition to the clinical reality. Tenenbaum identifies 3 specific traits that are missing in a psychopath. It's defined by what isn't there.
Okay, what are they?
First, no feelings. Second, no empathy. And third, and perhaps most dangerous for society, no moral conscience, no guilt.
It's hard for a normal person to even simulate what that feels like, to have no guilt. It's like driving a car with no brakes.
Or a car with no steering wheel, just an accelerator. But here is the challenge. If you don't have feelings or empathy, how do you survive in high society? High society, and networking in general, is built on connection.
Right, it's all about rapport.
It's built on, I like you like me, we bond over the shared interest. If you feel nothing, wouldn't you stand out as a robot?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
You'd think people would spot the uncanny valley in his personality.
But they didn't. And Mookie Tenenbaum explains the mechanism beautifully in a very dark way. He says psychopaths survive by mimicry. They learn to fake these traits to create reciprocity.
Reciprocity. Unpack that for me in this context. What does that mean?
Normal human interaction is based on reciprocity. I give you a gift, you feel a social urge to give me one back, I confide in you, you confide in me. It's a loop.
Okay.
Tenenbaum argues that a psychopath learns to simulate the first half of that loop to enslave the other person. They feign interest, they feign care, they feign deep friendship. The victim feels the need to reciprocate, to give trust, to give money, to give access.
Wow.
But the psychopath doesn't actually feel the bond, they are just pulling a lever.
That's just terrifying. It's like an AI learning to speak human. It knows the syntax of emotion, but there's no ghost in the machine.
It is exactly like that. It's a performance. And Mookie Tenenbaum argues that when that emotional mimicry wasn't enough, Epstein switched to hard leverage. He identified early on that sex, and specifically perversion, was the ultimate lever. He realized that there is a significant percentage of the powerful population that has what we might call perverse interests, desires, that exist outside the legal or moral norm.
And if you can fulfill those desires,
You own them. If you provide the venue, the means, and the secrecy for those desires, you aren't just a service provider, you are the vault keeper.
you hold the keys to their destruction.
And he built his entire business model on that.
And this wasn't just a random hobby for him. He industrialized it. Mookie Tenenbaum describes it as building a social network in the 70s and 80s, long before Mark Zuckerberg was even born.
It's a great analogy. Tenenbaum draws on his own experience living in New York during that era. He paints a picture of a city that was gritty, dangerous, but also incredibly fluid socially.
Right.
High-level networking was the norm. You had these circles of businessmen, politicians, royalty, all mixing in these exclusive clubs. And Tenenbaum notes that sex was often the currency used to bond these groups together.
Why sex?
It was a way of creating a shared secret, a shared vulnerability. If we are all doing something illicit together, none of us can rat on the other.
Mutually assured destruction, but for parties.
Precisely. And Epstein became the host of that destruction.
Okay, so he's climbing the ladder. He's the poor kid who learned to mimic the elite. But then there's this other shadow hanging over him, the one that spawns a million conspiracy theories. The intelligence connection. You hear it all the time. Epstein was Mossad. Epstein was CIA. What does Mookie Tenenbaum actually say about this? Because he seems to have a more nuanced take than just yes or no.
This is where Tenenbaum offers a really fascinating insight into the branding of intelligence. He says Epstein claimed to work for Mossad constantly. He dropped hints. He let people assume it.
Right.
But we have to ask, why Mossad? He was an American guy from Brooklyn. Why not claim CIA?
Yeah, that would be the logical leap. That's the home team.
Well, according to Mookie Tenenbaum, you have to look at the reputation of those agencies in the 70s and 80s. The CIA, they had a bad reputation. They were seen as clumsy, bureaucratic, bogged down in scandals like Watergate and Iran-Contra later on, the KGB. They were the enemy, but Mossad...
Mossad was like the James Bond of agencies.
Exactly. They had glamour. Tenenbaum reminds us these were the guys who kidnapped Adolf Eichmann from Argentina and brought him to justice. They pulled off the raid on Entebbe. They were seen as ruthless, efficient, and sophisticated.
So it was a marketing strategy. Claiming to be Mossad was good for business.
Precisely. Mookie Tenenbaum suggests Epstein was likely not a spy, at least not initially, but a brilliant swindler who used the allure of Mossad to recruit people or explain away his secrecy.
How so?
If you tell an investor, I can't tell you where this money came from or where it's going, it's Mossad, they stop asking questions. It makes you look dangerous and important. It shuts down due diligence.
That is brilliant and devious. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you is the ultimate way to avoid showing your tax returns.
It worked. But, and this is a big but, Mookie Tenenbaum does say there was a real spy in the mix. The connection wasn't totally fabricated. It just wasn't Epstein. Tenenbaum points to Robert Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Correct. And we need to understand who Robert Maxwell was. He wasn't just a rich guy. He was a media mogul, a massive figure in the UK owning newspapers. But more importantly, he owned the company that printed banknotes for various countries.
He literally printed money.
Literally. Think about the security clearance you need for that. Think about the access. Mookie Tenenbaum confirms that Maxwell was likely Mossad. He was deeply, deeply embedded in the intelligence world.
And his end was just as mysterious as Epstein's, wasn't it? I remember that.
He fell off his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, near the Canary Islands. Most people, including Tenenbaum, believe he was assassinated. It was ruled an accident suicide, but the circumstances were incredibly suspicious.
Right.
But the telltale sign that confirms Tenenbaum's theory is the funeral.
What happened at the funeral?
He was buried in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives. And according to Mookie Tenenbaum, high-ranking Mossad chiefs and Israeli government officials were in attendance. You don't get a state-level send-off like that if you're just a newspaper publisher who slipped on a wet deck.
Wow. So when Ghislaine Maxwell walks into Epstein's life, she isn't just a socialite. She is the daughter of a super spy.
Exactly. She is the bridge. She brought that legitimacy, that tradecraft, and those connections to Epstein.
So Epstein was the ambitious grifter looking for a way in.
And Ghislaine was the one who knew how the machinery of intelligence and high finance actually worked. She legitimized his Mossad cosplay because she came from the real thing.
Let's talk about where all this culminated, the physical manifestation of this network, the island, Little St. James. Mookie Tenenbaum discusses the visitor's log, and we know it is the who's who of the last 30 years.
It is.
But he makes a point that I think is important for context. He says it wasn't an orgy 24/7.
No, and that's important to understand the trap. If it was just a dungeon, no one would go. Mookie Tenenbaum notes that people like Howard Lutnick went there with their wives, their children, their babysitters.
Really? With their families?
For many, it was just a status symbol. I'm going to Jeffrey's Island. It had beaches, luxury houses, great food. It was a place to be seen. It was like a private club.
So not everyone on the list is a criminal. That's a crucial distinction because the internet likes to paint everyone with the same brush.
Not necessarily. But this brings up Mookie Tenenbaum's concept of willful blindness. This is the psychological mechanism that allowed the network to function.
Willful blindness.
You go for the luxury, you enjoy the status, you see a teenage girl who looks a little too young, or you see strange comings and goings at odd hours. What do?
You look at the sunset instead.
Exactly. You enjoy the fruit, but you ignore the poison tree. You convince yourself it's none of your business. That willful blindness is what allowed Epstein to operate in plain sight for so long.
He relied on it.
He relied on the fact that his guests liked the perks more than they cared about the morality.
And then there's the specific names Mookie Tenenbaum brings up. Some of these are explosive, and his analysis gives us a different angle than the mainstream news. Let's start with Bill Gates.
This is a very specific and quite bizarre allegation that Mookie Tenenbaum discusses. We know Gates met with Epstein many times, even after Epstein's first conviction.
Which was always the big question. Why?
Well, Tenenbaum points to a specific reason for the secret. The story goes that Gates allegedly had sex with a woman on the island or in the network and contracted a venereal disease, possibly syphilis.
Syphilis. That feels archaic.
It does, but it's a persistent issue. And the story continues that Gates allegedly asked Epstein for antibiotics to treat it secretly.
But wait, Bill Gates is one of the richest men on earth. He could buy a hospital. He could buy a pharmaceutical company. Why ask a disgraced financier for penicillin?
Secrecy. Absolute secrecy. If he goes to his own doctor, it's in the medical record. Insurance trails, staff gossip. If he uses Epstein, it's off the books. It's a transaction in the shadows. The implication Mookie Tenenbaum makes is that Gates wanted to treat it before his wife, Melinda, found out.
Okay.
Tenenbaum suggests this breach of trust and the health risk involved might have been a key factor in their sudden and very quiet divorce years later. It wasn't just we grew apart, it was you put me at risk.
That puts a whole new spin on that breakup.
Yeah.
What about Donald Trump? He's obviously been linked to Epstein in photos. They were part of the same New York social scene.
Mookie Tenenbaum's take here is interesting because it cuts through the partisan noise. He acknowledges Trump was a friend, calling him a good guy in Epstein's eyes at one point, but Tenenbaum argues Trump was a picaflor.
A picaflor. I love that word. What does it mean?
It's Spanish for hummingbird. It describes a womanizer, someone who flits from flower to flower. Tenenbaum argues Trump was definitely into women. He was a playboy. He liked the beauty pageants, the models. But Tenenbaum distinguishes that from the specific dark pathology of Epstein. He argues Trump wasn't necessarily involved in the predatory underage crimes.
Is there evidence for that distinction?
Well, he notes that Trump actually banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago at one point and allegedly denounced him to authorities early on when he realized what was happening.
So in Mookie Tenenbaum's view, there is a distinction between being a hummingbird playboy and being a predator.
Exactly. One is a vice, the other is a crime.
Then we have Prince Andrew. I mean, this has been a slow-motion car crash for the royals.
An absolute catastrophe. Mookie Tenenbaum speculates that the pressure on Prince Andrew is so immense that he is a genuine suicide risk.
Bro.
Think about it. He's been stripped of his duties, his military titles, his reputation is in tatters. He is a pariah in his own family. And Tenenbaum even mentions that King Charles has crossed paths with this network in the past. It's a stain that the royal family simply cannot wash out because it's embedded in their social circle.
And one more name that's causing trouble right now in the UK, Peter Mandelson.
Yes, Lord Mandelson, a high-ranking Labour politician, the architect of New Labour. Mookie Tenenbaum points out a strange detail here. Mandelson is gay.
Okay.
So the usual honey trap with young women that Epstein used on others wouldn't necessarily apply to him.
So why was he there? What was the leverage?
Because, as Tenenbaum notes, the network wasn't just about sex. It was about power. Mandelson was involved in the network, accepted money or loans, and lied about it. Tenenbaum notes this is causing a major headache for the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, because Mandelson was a key advisor.
So it shows the versatility of the blackmail.
It shows that Epstein's leverage was multifaceted. If he couldn't get you with sex, he got you with money or access or simply the fact that you were in the room.
It all comes crashing down eventually.
Yeah,
Or does it? Let's talk about the fall. We know about the first arrest in Florida.
This is the infamous sweetheart deal. Epstein was caught red-handed with a 14-year-old. In Florida, or anywhere really, that should be 20 years in prison, minimum.
Yeah, that's not a gray area.
Instead, he gets 18 months. And most of that was on work release, where he could go to his office during the day.
It was a slap on the wrist. And the prosecutor, Acosta, had a very strange excuse when he was questioned about it later during his confirmation hearings.
That's right. Acosta claimed he was told to back off because Epstein belonged to intelligence.
Yeah, there's that word again. Intelligence.
But Mookie Tenenbaum makes a sharp, logical observation here. A local prosecutor in Florida doesn't care about Mossad. If someone says he's an Israeli spy, a Florida district attorney says, I don't care, he broke Florida law. Foreign intelligence has no jurisdiction.
Good point.
The only pressure that would work on a U.S. federal prosecutor is U.S. intelligence.
So Tenenbaum is implying the call came from inside the house.
Yes. He implies the pressure likely came from the CIA or higher U.S. authorities using the intelligence card to make the problem go away. They protected him because he was useful or because he knew too much.
But it didn't stay away forever. He gets arrested again in New York, and then he dies.
The death in the Manhattan jail. Mookie Tenenbaum highlights the suspicious circumstances we all heard, but he emphasizes how incredibly convenient it was. The cameras malfunctioned.
The cameras. Plural.
Both of them. The guards were asleep or out shopping for furniture on the internet. Procedures were ignored.
It reads like a bad movie plot. It's almost too incompetent to be believable.
Tenenbaum puts it bluntly. Whether it was active murder, someone going in and strangling him, or allowed suicide, where they just gave him the means, stepped back, and turned off the cameras, the result was the same.
It closed the book.
It closed the book before he could talk. It protected the network.
But the documents survived. We recently saw the release of 3 million pages. Mookie Tenenbaum points out something fascinating about this, not just what's in them, but how we know what's in them.
This is a technological turning point. Tenenbaum emphasizes that reviewing 3 million pages would have taken an army of lawyers years to do manually, and it would have cost millions of dollars.
An impossible task for humans.
Exactly. This recent release was only possible because of artificial intelligence.
AI doing the legal grunt work.
AI was able to scan, sort, and redact these documents at a speed that humans couldn't match. It identified names, cross-referenced dates, and prepared the release. Without AI, these files might have stayed buried in a warehouse for another decade.
So AI is finally helping us catch the bad guys.
To an extent. But Mookie Tenenbaum warns us, despite the AI, despite the release, national security redactions are still there. We will never see the full picture.
We only see what they want us to see.
The public gets a few headlines, we gossip about Bill Gates or Prince Andrew, we get bored, and we move on. The mystery remains because the system is designed to protect itself.
And that's the tragedy of it. The circus leaves town, and the truth gets buried under the sawdust.
Exactly.
Okay, let's take a breath. That is a lot of dark psychology, conspiracy, and heavy analysis. But as we promised at the start, we're going to pivot. Because this manipulation of power, this adjusting of leverage, it isn't just for deviants on private islands. It's happening right now on the world stage.
It is. And Mookie Tenenbaum uses a very specific visual metaphor to describe how Donald Trump and, by extension, the U.S. is managing global crises right now.
The stove.
The stove. I want you to visualize a gas stove in a kitchen. You have 4 or 5 burners. Mookie Tenenbaum describes foreign policy not as a war, but as cooking.
Cooking. Yeah.
You have Iran on one burner, Venezuela on another, China on a third. You don't cook everything at once at the same temperature.
So you manage the heat.
Precisely. You turn the heat up on one when you need a distraction or a quick win, and you turn the heat down on another when you want it to simmer or when you don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. It's about utility.
So it's not about solving the problem permanently. It's about managing the temperature for your own benefit.
Exactly. It's crisis management for political gain. Let's look at the Iran burner. Tenenbaum notes that Trump recently gave them a 1-month window to negotiate. He ramped up the rhetoric. Why?
To scare them into a deal.
Partly. But Tenenbaum argues it's also because threatening conflict or creating urgency with Iran is a great way to distract from domestic issues or to look strong to his base.
Oh, okay.
You turn that burner up to high, the flames shoot up, and everyone looks at the fire. It consumes the media cycle. Are we going to war? What will happen? It sucks the oxygen out of the room.
And while everyone is staring at the fire in the Middle East, what's happening on the other burners? Are they just off?
Well, let's look at the Venezuela burner. That one is on a slow simmer, but Mookie Tenenbaum reveals that something huge is cooking there, largely out of sight. The word is amnesty.
Amnesty. For whom? The people?
No, for the regime.
For Maduro and his circle.
Tenenbaum says secret negotiations are happening right now. Figures like Delcy Rodriguez are negotiating with intermediaries, but they aren't negotiating for fair elections. They know they can't win those. They aren't negotiating for democracy. They are negotiating for their own skins.
They want a golden parachute, a get-out-of-jail-free card.
They want safety. They want guarantees that if they step down or allow a transition, they won't be prosecuted in the U.S. They won't end up in a supermax prison. And crucially, they want to keep some of their stolen wealth.
That sounds, honestly, it sounds infuriating. After everything they've done to that country, after the starvation, the exodus of millions, they get to retire to a villa in Turkey or somewhere.
It is infuriating. But Tenenbaum argues it is realpolitik. Sometimes you have to let the criminal walk to save the hostages, and there is a major development that signals this end is near.
What's that?
Tenenbaum notes that Cuba has expelled its advisors from Venezuela.
Wait, Cuba kicked its own people out? I thought they were tight allies.
They were. But Cuba has recalled its military and intelligence advisors from Venezuela and also from Guatemala. This is a massive signal. It means the structure is collapsing.
Why would they do that?
The Cubans can't afford to keep them there, or the host countries can't afford to pay them anymore. The Socialist Alliance is breaking because the money has run out.
And that leads us to the Cuba burner.
Yeah.
If Venezuela is simmering, what is happening in Havana? Mookie Tenenbaum paints a pretty dire picture of the island right now.
It's worse than dire. It's a total systems collapse. Tenenbaum points out that right now, as we speak, it should be high season. It's winter in Canada and Europe. Usually, tourists flock to Cuba for the beaches.
It's their main source of cash.
It's their primary source of hard currency. But tourism is down 25%.
That's a death blow for their economy. Why are people staying away?
Infrastructure failure. It's not just about politics, it's about basic comfort. There's no electricity for long stretches, hotels are closing floors because they can't power the AC. And most shockingly, Tenenbaum notes that airlines are actually stopping flights because there is no jet fuel to refuel the planes for the return trip.
That's incredible. If you can't guarantee you can fly home, you don't go.
Exactly. The risk is too high. So the economy is grinding to a halt. And Tenenbaum highlights the Trump-Rubio factor here. He argues that Trump has made crushing Cuba a personal goal, partly to please Marco Rubio, who is obviously a hawk on this issue.
So they're squeezing them.
They have squeezed the supply lines. Even Mexico, which has often been a lifeline for Cuba, has been warned not to sell oil to them.
So is the regime going to fall? Are we finally going to see a revolution in the streets?
This is where Mookie Tenenbaum's prediction is very specific and quite grim. He predicts no, not a violent fall, not a storming of the palace.
And what?
He uses a very specific, visceral term to describe what will happen. He says the regime will be castrated.
Castrated. That is a violent image.
It means they will be rendered powerless but left in place. They will be forced to open up slightly, not because they have had a change of heart, not because they want democracy, but out of sheer biological desperation.
Just right.
They need food, they need fuel, they will have to beg the U.S. for survival. It's a slow strangulation, turning the burner down until the flame just flickers and dies out.
That's ruthless. It's weaponizing poverty against the leadership.
It is. It's the same manipulation of leverage we saw with Epstein, just on a geopolitical scale. Epstein used shame and blackmail. The U.S. is using starvation and energy dependency.
But does this master of flames strategy always work? I mean, Trump portrays himself as being in total control of the kitchen, but Mookie Tenenbaum points out a crack in the armor right here in the U.S.
Yes, the domestic context. You can't just look at foreign policy in a vacuum. Tenenbaum notes a recent failure regarding immigration enforcement in Minnesota. Trump wanted a massive crackdown, a show of force.
Okay.
But he had to pull back the immigration police.
Resistance.
Logistics, local resistance, legal challenges. It shows that he doesn't have total control over every lever. He can threaten Iran, but he can't always control a police action in Minneapolis. It shows that even the president can't just turn every burner up whenever he wants. The stove malfunctions sometimes.
And there's an economic storm brewing, too, isn't there? That has to be a factor.
Mookie Tenenbaum mentions the economic clouds gathering layoffs, a brewing crisis in certain sectors. He argues that as the election cycle heats up, these economic realities will likely overshadow the Epstein news and even the foreign policy wins.
Because at the end of the day,
people care about their jobs and the price of eggs more than they care about a dead billionaire's secrets or a coup in Venezuela.
Which brings us back to that idea of distraction. If the economy goes bad, maybe the Iran burner gets turned up again.
That is exactly the pattern Mookie Tenenbaum suggests we watch for. If domestic trouble rises, look for foreign trouble to spike as a countermove.
So we've gone from the twisted psychology of a man who couldn't feel guilt to a global network of spies and blackmail to the high-stakes poker game of international relations. It's a lot to process. It feels like we're seeing the world through a very cynical, very dark filter.
It is, but I think Mookie Tenenbaum helps us see the common thread. It isn't just chaos. It's about the manipulation of power. Epstein faked empathy to entrap billionaires. A president adjusts the heat on foreign nations to manage his domestic popularity.
And in both cases.
In both cases, people, whether they are underage girls on an island or starting citizens in Havana, are treated as pawns. They are just leverage. They are chips on the table.
Mookie Tenenbaum also gave us a forecast to look out for, a date to circle on the calendar.
Yes, he mentioned an April meeting between the U.S. and China. That is the next big milestone. Everything happening now, the sanctions, the posturing with Iran, the squeezing of Cuba is setting the table for that meeting. It's all about strengthening the hand before the big negotiation.
It really makes you think. We started this episode talking about willful blindness. Mookie Tenenbaum said the people on Epstein's island practiced it to enjoy the luxury. They looked away from the ugliness to enjoy the beach.
And that leads to a provocative question for all of us. As we look at the current geopolitical map-starving populations in Cuba, amnesty deals for dictators in Venezuela so they can keep their stolen millions, what are we willfully ignoring right now?
What are we pretending not to see?
What are we pretending not to see because it's convenient? Are we ignoring the human cost of sanctions because we like the idea of winning? Are we ignoring the corruption because the stock market is up?
Are we just guests on a much larger global version of that island?
That is the question Mookie Tenenbaum leaves us with, and it's one that's hard to answer honestly.
A chilling thought to end on, but a necessary one. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We've peeled back the layers, and hopefully we've given you something to think about. We'll be back next time to uncover more of what lies beneath the surface.
Until then, keep your eyes open.
Bye for now.